Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Fit and Fabulous with me, Dr. Lena. Super excited today because we are going to be talking menopause, HRT, and all of those exciting things. And I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Kat Brown, Dr. Kathleen Brown. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. Would you like to just start off by telling people a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure, sure. I am a board certified OBGYN in the States. I'm in the Philadelphia area. And I practice kind of two-pronged. I work in a hospital doing OB/GYN laborist medicine, meaning that I just work as an inpatient physician, covering deliveries, covering emergencies, things like that. But then I'm also the medical director of an online GYN telemedicine company called Winona, where we provide care for women in midlife, specifically through the perimenopause and menopause transition. So we do online HRT for patients that are struggling with symptoms and that maybe don't have access to a doctor who's willing to prescribe and to help them.
Perfect, perfect. And that's what we're going to talk about. You definitely have lots of things going on, juggling lots of balls. I'm just going to translate for our English. So we don't call it OBGY. What do you call it? OBGYN. So in England, we call it obs and gynae. And I think people might just, yeah, obs and gynae, I think is the,
Obstetrics and gynecology, yeah. And I guess, yeah, everyone has their own abbreviation.
yeah. Exactly. So let's dive in. And you're absolutely right about HRT. And I think in some places, people actually find it really difficult to get. Like, I know I've got friends in France and they're just like, I don't know how to get hold of it. Like, I can't just go to my GP and get it. But before we get there, let's backtrack a little bit. Let's just think about menopause, which we love talking about. But do you want to just give us a quick overview of menopause and why it is such a big, important time with women and, what kind of symptoms and things? Because I think a lot of people just are busy getting on with their lives. They're not really thinking about menopause. And then suddenly they kind of find themselves feeling a bit like not the normal selves and thinking, wait, could it be menopause or is it, I don't know, just something else?
Yeah, and I think, menopause is kind of the lady of the hour that a lot of people are talking about right now, but it's a huge transition in our lives and it's just as big as going through puberty, coming into our own infertility. It's just a change in our reproductive life cycle. But it's when we near the end of our fertility phase, and there's not been a lot of focus put on it. And I think that a lot of women don't realize when they're starting the process of perimenopause, and perimenopause, that term refers to all of the time leading up to the final period. Like menopause itself is just the name for when you have your final menstrual cycle and the official end of ovulation and producing eggs and being able to reproduce. But it's actually a long period of time that we spend more time in perimenopause. Because women can have symptoms for up to a decade before they actually go through that final period. And the symptoms are very subtle. Sometimes we just kind of incorporate them into our life and we write it off as stress or fatigue. But often some of the early symptoms women experience are brain fog and mood swings. Sometimes it's changes in libido. Often I hear early on a lot of women start to struggle with their sleep quality. You may have been, had no problem with sleep and getting restorative sleep and do fine. Then all of a sudden you're not staying asleep all night, waking up in the middle of the night or having trouble, difficulty falling asleep. And then we start to see more of the vasomotor or physical symptoms where women start to get hot flashes, night sweats, sometimes vaginal dryness, loss of lubrication when it comes to sexual activity, and changes in the skin, the hair. Women may notice changes where their hair may start thinning more, the skin gets more dry. We start to develop a loss of like turgor and suppleness of the skin with the loss of estrogen. And all of these changes are fundamentally linked to the decreasing hormone production in our body. As women, we primarily, function with estrogen and progesterone, but also we have testosterone too. And as those levels are declining, we start to see these symptoms happen. They start manifesting in different ways throughout our body. So every woman's complex of symptoms is unique, but I would say that early on, most women notice that the symptoms are very vague. Often they might get put on, they might go to the doctor saying, I just don't feel like myself. I'm having mood swings. I'm less tolerant of my family. I'm yelling at my kids more. my partner is annoying me more, and then they end up getting put on an antidepressant. And often that may help temporarily, but often that's like the beginning of symptoms. And even for me as well. I mean, I, as a board certified gynecologist, I thought that life would be good until you turned 50. I think a lot of us had this impression that it's going to be this like overnight transition, that all of a sudden we'll notice symptoms and something will happen, but it's a much more gradual, much more like it creeps into your life a little bit more subtly. Symptoms do, and as they build over time, and I think that that's something to be aware of. And for many of us as women, we're so very busy in our careers. We have so many other things going on at this particular time in our life that it's hard to recognize those early symptoms very clearly.
And it's easy to just ignore them and just go, oh, I feel tired because I haven't slept, and then brush it under the carpet and get on and not really think about things. And another thing that
Exactly.
comes to my mind as well is, when I was at med school and learned about changing of eyes and things like this, like obviously I was in my 20s when I was at med school, but it was like, well, that happens when you're old, like that's when you're super,
Right.
super old. I arrived there and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm super old. But in my brain, it was, yeah, that's like the next stage, that's the second half of your life. And but now that I've arrived here, I'm like, wait, but I'm still energetic. I can still do these things. I've still got loads of stuff that needs to be done. It's not like, okay, it's downwards from here. It's like, well, actually, how can we keep women healthy and fit, doing all the things that they want to do, feeling in top peak performance, I think is
Yes,
really,
and keep your vitality, I think is so key.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, because it
yeah.
it doesn't have to be a decline. I mean, even 20, 30 years ago, when we look at women that were in this age range, if you look back in time, even on the television and movies, pop culture showed 40s and 50s women as like, AARP, like elderly, the Golden Girls, for instance. I mean, their average age in that television show was 40s, like late 40s, early 50s,
Yes.
except for the mother.
Oh, active, I'm sure.
But yeah, comparatively now, women in their 40s are not going gently into older age. Like we're taking care of ourselves better. And I think that for me and talking to my patients especially, I think that menopause is, a time where I like the word itself because I think it forces women to pause and to
Mhm.
kind of reevaluate their lives. And it is a wake up call for many of us that are so used to multitasking and juggling and doing all these things. It's a big change in our bodies that really forces us to look inward and really bring the attention back to ourselves and our self care. And I think it's an impetus for that we need to start turning things inward again and
Yeah,
focusing on ourselves, which I think is
yeah.
so very important.
I love that because I think so many people that I see just put themselves at the bottom of the pile. And a lot of people I work with or chat
Especially
with,
women. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. They know what they need to do. They just haven't allocated time in their busy week to actually make it happen. And they aren't complicated things. For me, I'm talking about healthy eating and a bit of exercise. And once you get into the habit of doing it, it's easy. But there is that change of, oh, I'm not doing anything to now I have to implement it and make it work. One thing we haven't talked about in menopause is weight loss, or weight gain, I should say. And I
Yeah.
know this is one of those controversial topics, but it does always seem to women that, they hit this hodgepodge of hormones. And as a side note, I love that you talked about teenagers and puberty because I have sons who are kids who are going, they're in their teens. And I look at my 16-year-old son and he is working out and super strong and so strong. And I'm like, what's the difference between him and me? And obviously, it's that little hormone testosterone. And I
Right.
really think that we underestimate hormones. And I think, but hang on, wait a minute, there's not much difference between him and me. But obviously, he has a lot more testosterone than me, which is why he doesn't do much, but he's actually super strong. And really, I guess we can talk about the differences between men and women. And that's why men are so much stronger than women. But I think we do underestimate hormones. But this time of hormonal change seems to be, for a lot of women, a time of frustration in terms of weight gain, because it feels like they've come through perhaps childbirth and then they want to get back to pre childbirth weight, yet somehow along with menopause and everything else that's going on. They find themselves with normally it's extra belly fat that they really want to get rid of, and it just feels really frustrating. But before, they knew what to do and they would, I don't know, skip lunch for, not that I'm recommending skipping lunch, but that was the method that they used in their 20s. I'll skip lunch for 2 weeks and I'll get back to my normal self. And that doesn't work anymore for a lot of people. And it just leads them to
Right.
feeling really frustrated. So, what's going on there in terms of weight gain?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is in this time frame, we're in this like fight or flight stress response, right? So we're not sleeping well. We're not optimizing our health in many other ways. And so when you're in that sympathetic or fight or flight mode, your body is unconsciously holding on to every possible calorie. And your stress hormone, the cortisol levels are high. And so it is this fight or flight response. And when you're not in a state where, you can optimize your metabolism, if you're in that constant stress state, you are holding on to every possible calorie no matter how much you work. And I think the hardest thing is that you have to realize we have to work on balancing, optimizing your sleep, optimizing your hydration, making your nutrition the best it can be, and trying to get that hormonal environment optimal as well so that your body can get out of that high stress state and start actually using your food for fuel and not trying to reserve everything in that menobelly that we call it. That midsection is where a lot of women gain weight. Um, and I think that's the hardest challenge because as human beings, we want instant gratification. We want instant results. We want to be able to make a change and see the results yesterday. But this is a long haul. Like this is something that we have to work on, little changes that can be incorporated into your lifestyle. This is lifestyle modification, not necessarily like fad dieting anymore. You can't do that. Like those things don't work anymore for lasting, healthy weight loss, to optimize your best body shape and your best health.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, thinking about this hodgepodge of things that are going on, before we talk about HRT, and I love you talking about it, the long term that we really want. And I think for me, when I think about, well, what should people bother to make changes? Like, it's actually quite a big ask to get people to make changes and think, well, what's the benefits for them? Now, obviously, feeling good and leading a long and healthy life are up there.
Right.
What can people do when they're going through menopause to lead a long and healthy and vibrant life? What are the sort of main pieces of the puzzle that you would advocate?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is movement. If you're not someone who's a gym goer, didn't play sports, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's just incorporating daily movement and exercise into your life. And I think that's so very important for us to maintain our strength, but also our flexibility and really our independence too. Because as our strength is declining in age as women, we need to try to combat that and stay as strong as we can, keep our bones healthy. Exercise not only will help with like your heart health and cardiovascular fitness, but also with your bone strength too. And so, having weight resistance, or even walking, weightlifting if you can, but even doing anything to move your body, parking farther away from the store when you go shopping, taking the stairs instead of taking the elevator. It's like these little changes that you add 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, whereas you weren't doing it before, that those periods of activity add up and help with overall improving your overall fitness and your
Yes.
heart health as well.
And you were talking about stress beforehand, stress being one of the really big components. And I think in my mind, one of the best things we can do for stress is to go and get physical and do some exercise. And it really
Yes.
helps reduce stress. I mean, I think the other big piece is how we think about things, but exercise is just, I don't know, for me, I love exercise. I swim a lot. If people who listen to the podcast regularly know that I swim a lot in the sea. And I've just started going to the gym actually because I found I've got little windows that I can fit into going to the gym. And I would say to people, it's actually really enjoyable in a way that cardiovascular, like I love cardiovascular exercise, but going to the gym just feels actually more relaxed. Cardiovascular exercise, perhaps I'm not doing it right, but I always feel like I've done some work. I don't know about gyms where you're listening, where they are. But our gym is actually full of women and excitingly older women as well. And obviously there are men there. My son, who's 16, he goes, I have to make sure I don't go at the same time as him because he doesn't want to be embarrassed by his mum going there. But the gentlemen who are there, they're super, kind and helpful. And if they see me doing something wrong, they'll come and help me and correct me in a really lovely way, not in a, oh my goodness, you're doing it all wrong way, but just like, oh, look, I can help you do this. And so actually, I would say the biggest bit about going to the gym is the first couple of times. And, I made sure I went with some friends the first couple of times, and then they stopped well, they didn't stop going, but we go at different times now. But now I have the confidence just to go in by myself. And as I say, it's fun. And I really notice that it helps me. I have very closed hips, and I really notice that it helps me with my hips in a way that swimming doesn't, because swimming and cycling, you're doing everything face on, and you're not doing the flexibility. Now, obviously, there are other ways that you can do that, but and my message really is don't be scared of the gym. It's not as
Yeah,
scary as you think it is going to be. It's becoming far more acceptable for women to go to the gym because we know that we have to keep up our muscle bulk. So moving
absolutely.
on to HRT, and before we were recording, I was saying to you, like in my brain, I did train as a pediatric doctor on the side, into obs and gynae, but in my brain, HRT is sort of bad and something to avoid and something that I hope that I don't have to take. Like obviously I would if my doctor said, I really recommend you take it. But in my brain, I'm kind of thinking, yeah, I don't really want to take HRT. And that was, up until a few years ago where I started thinking about HRT and then listening to what lifestyle medicine doctors were saying and what other people were saying. And actually, it turns out that it's not as bad as I thought it was. And in fact, actually, perhaps everyone should be on it. So can you just talk a little bit about the history
Yeah.
of what has happened and why people have changed their minds about HRT?
I mean, I think years ago it was a mainstay of treatment. I think that a lot of women were placed on HRT, but the pendulum swung so far in the other direction after the Women's Health Initiative study was published and after, we started seeing news articles and things even on publication on TV that, that HRT is bad and HRT will cause breast cancer. And it just was so much fear mongering and there were some really good things in that study, but there was also some bad parts to that study in that they were giving HRT not to an ideal population, to a population of women who were already well beyond their menopausal transition, after the age of 65, starting women on hormones, and it was much more risky to start it in a patient who was so much older. And what we're learning now too is that if we give bioidentical hormones, meaning that we give a hormone that has the same structural, the structure of what our bodies are making on their own compared to a synthetically lab made hormone, like we used in birth control pills, for instance, that the body incorporates these hormones much more naturally. We can use lower doses to help with symptom control and to achieve the results that we want with less side effects. And so we're able to use lower doses, also using more transdermal methods, meaning, that they're absorbed through the skin. So we're bypassing the GI tract a lot of the times too, because when we have to take a pill, by the time you swallow the pill, it gets broken down and processed by your stomach and then processed by your liver. It has to be a much higher dose so that the dose that's finally getting delivered to your intended tissues is high enough to do its work. But what happens is then you end up getting a lot of the side effects on the journey for it to be processed. So a lot of, gastrointestinal side effects, things like that. But I think that what we're really realizing is that the other part of this too is that not a lot of research was actually done on women. Like women were not actually included in research trials on medications because we had too many variables with our hormones and with pregnancy and with postpartum and so many changes. And so it wasn't until recently that women were actually being studied and being research subjects on medications. And so I think now more and more information is coming out, more and more research is being done, and we're seeing the benefits and how much estrogen can benefit really every tissue in our body. Optimal brain functioning with HRT. We're seeing that adding estrogen into a woman's plan can actually help offset the onset of dementia and help prevent Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
There's some great neuroscience research being done. And there's been books that have been published. Like one of the ones I'm reading right now is The Menopause Brain. I don't know if you've seen that book out by Dr. Moscone. So there's a lot more information coming out now on the benefits, but also all the fear that we had of HRT causing breast cancer. what was really neglected in the big talk about, women and what are women actually dying of? More women die each year from heart disease and heart attack than ever die from breast cancer. But we have this like unfounded fear that we're all going to get breast cancer from this particular medication when we're much more likely to have a cardiovascular event if we don't take care of
Maybe
ourselves.
estrogen going to protect us from having a
Yeah,
cardiovascular event.
right. Estrogen is cardioprotective. It helps protect those blood vessels around our heart, helps keep the heart muscle healthy. So, yeah, I think that now more information is being released about how beneficial these hormones are to our overall health and well-being. And I think that if you look at the trends themselves, for women OBGYNs and women, women gynecologists that are actually going through this transition themselves, we're all on HRT and we don't want to stop because we're seeing the benefits and the evidence. So I think that's kind of proof in the pudding. Like for the people reading the research and seeing the benefits out there, we're actually taking the medication that we're recommending to our patients, which I think it
Perfect.
says a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about an ideal target of women. Who would that ideal population be?
Really, whenever your symptoms become bothersome enough that they are interfering with your day to day life, that's an okay time to start having the conversation to start HRT. You don't have to wait until your final period. In fact, I mean, you can start getting the benefits of adding low dose estrogen in before that final period happens. So, for most patients, that means you could start in your mid 40s. Now, if you're one of the lucky few that don't have any symptoms at all until your 50s, you start then. But really, the ideal time to start HRT is before the age of 60. So the average age of menopause in the US is 52. I think it varies around the world depending on race and ethnicity, but roughly around that time frame, most of us will hit that transition. So, I think late 40s, early 50s is a great time, but really the safety is to start it before the age of 60 because after age 60, there can be a slight increase in your cardiovascular risk when you first start a hormone. It's temporary. It's not something that's long lasting, but that's why that's kind of our window of time that we'd like to begin therapy before that age, if possible.
And so most people, presumably, they go and talk to their family doctor or their GP and talk to them about it. That's their first port of call, is it?
Right. Yeah, I think it is. And a lot of women, especially in the US, maybe don't go to a primary care doctor. A lot of women use their gynecologist as their primary care. They go once a year for their annual exam, well, woman exam, and breast exam. And often they may go over routine health things and get blood work then too, for other things, checking their thyroid and such. But yeah, you going to your family doctor or your GP or going to your gynecologist would be ideal. Have the conversation. And I really like to encourage patients to try to start tracking their symptoms. Like when you start to feel off, and when you start to notice things creeping in, start making a note of it. And there's a lot of good information out there. We actually have a free symptom tracker available on our website for patients that they could download for free just to kind of help you gauge and keep a log of like, how much is this really affecting? Because if we don't pay attention to these small, subtle changes, sometimes all of a sudden we're overwhelmed by so many changes and it's hard to quantify like how long has it been happening? What's going on? And that's great information to bring to your doctor. When someone comes to me and says, I've been having these symptoms, that symptom, and they have some kind of record keeping, whether it's on their phone or on a calendar or something, it just gives me so much more information about how much they have been suffering with symptoms, what the length of time has been, but also the specific symptoms will tell me what hormones they're deficient in and what I think I can help them with the most with treatment.
And if people want to go the internet route and take advantage of your online telehealth company, how do they do that?
It's really easy. So the website is winona.com. So WINONA.com. We're right now in 34 states in the United States and hopefully expanding to all of them soon. But you would put in your information. There is free information, and we do have a medical journal part of our page too, that even if you're not quite ready, or you're not quite sure if you need treatment yet, you don't want to start that process, there are plenty of educational articles that you can go on to read about common symptoms of perimenopause and menopause. Because our other foundation is we just want to make sure that we have education available for patients because knowledge is powerful. And the more we empower ourselves to learn more about what's happening in our bodies, the best we can be equipped to help deal with those changes and make the best decisions for ourselves, I think.
So You have an online appointment. Is it only for people in the US or is it worldwide?
Right now, we're just in the United States. Yeah. And there's
Okay.
several other telemedicine companies in the United States as well. I'm not sure if something is similar in Europe just because I don't practice there, so I'm not as familiar. But yeah.
So just available and they have just and then they have an online consultation, or do you go to one of your clinics in one of those states?
Everything is online. So everything is through the internet and it's an asynchronous telemedicine platform, meaning that patients can message us 24/7. They don't have to wait for a scheduled appointment time or a video visit or anything like that. So if at 2 o'clock in the morning they're waking up with night sweats and they're thinking, God, I really need to talk to my doctor about this, they can hop on their phone or on their computer and message us then. And then the next time I log in, I get their message and respond, which is nice because it's a lot more fluid. You're not having to wait and save up all your questions for an appointment time like a month down the road, which is great.
Perfect, perfect. Well, what a shame that you don't do it in Europe, because I know that I've got friends who are in France who would love to have an appointment with you, and so that's a shame. But I will definitely leave a link in the show notes so that anyone who's in the US can take advantage and get some of your information and potentially book an appointment if they want to. So presumably, is the first appointment paid, or do you do like a
So right now, in order to discuss things with a doctor and review your medical history, there is no charge for that. There's no platform fee or like a membership fee. The only thing that patients pay for is the actual prescriptions when it's
okay?
time that we come to a decision together to make a treatment plan. And so they pay for the prescriptions, and that's the only cost to patients is for the medications themselves.
What a shame that you aren't in Europe.
I know, I know. Well, I mean, the other thing is, I mean, those people can certainly take advantage of the educational material that we have on the website and empower themselves with knowledge. That's something that they can use.
Perfect, perfect. Any last words of wisdom for people who are listening?
I think the biggest thing is to learn about your body, really pay attention to how you feel your best based on what you're eating and how well you feel after you move your body, but learn as much as you can about your own menstrual cycle so that when things start to change and you start to notice these symptoms, that you can be empowered to make the right decisions and the best thing for you. Because truly knowledge is power. And I think that it really helps us to take the best care of ourselves. And I think that, menopause is not a death sentence. It's not the end. I want women to reframe their thinking about this. And I really want them to think, that this is a time to really focus on yourself and make this second half of your life even better than the first. Without the stress of unwanted pregnancies and without the stress of having to deal with a lot of those other things. Now it's about maintaining our health, maintaining our vitality and our wellness. And I want women to feel empowered to do that.
Perfect, fabulous. And I will just end by praising one of my clients who is 70 and she is amazing. She goes surfing and she goes supboarding. And I don't think she realizes what an inspiration she is. But I think that's what we all want. Yeah. We want to be 70 and into our 80s and being active and doing these things that we wanted to do, but we didn't have time to do when we were younger. And now we do have time to do them. And we still have the energy and the muscles and the ability to be able to do them.
Absolutely. That's great.
Perfect. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. It was absolutely wonderful chatting to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.